Okay, one of the things that was suggested in your different assignments for this past week was to read Ruth. So, how does Ruth represent redemption and restoration?
She went out and gleaned in the field Boaz. And because of that, he saw him and was attracted to her. And then Naomi, her mother-in-law, told her, "Man, you go in there and you sleep with your feet." And she did. And he says, "Now get up and leave." She was like, and then he goes down to the place where God meets, and he says, "Okay, got the man named the dog," but he was one that was supposed to be up next to my Naomi's land. And he says, "No, I don't want it." So then Boaz said, "Well, I'll buy it, and because I buy it, then I'll get moved too."
Okay, so here she was. She was a widow, young widow, and Naomi, of course, was a widow, and Naomi actually changed her name to something that meant Mara, which means very bitter. But Naomi's able to find joy again because of Ruth, and marrying in to the kinsman redeemer. So he purchased, basically is what it amounts to. He purchased the land and Ruth, married her as his wife. Then she becomes a mother, and she's in the genealogy of Jesus. And David was one of her descendants, so and Jesus would be one of her descendants. So somebody whose life was basically ruined been turned around completely, and now she is one of the respected women of Israel. All right, that's an important thought that just kind of goes with today's lesson about how when Jesus healed somebody, it was more than just a physical healing. It was bringing a wholeness to that person. And we'll talk more about what I mean by that in a minute. But this idea of a wholeness. So, how do you help people who are separated from those they love, like married couples at odds, parents and teenagers, best friends having a tiff, or business partners having a tiff? How do you help somebody like that?
I think at first, just kind of be there with them and just let them vent.
Okay.
Go from there.
That's true. I mean, what I learned, what counseling courses that I've taken in my lifetime, basic thing I've learned about counseling is you just listen. And people will end up solving their own problems if you let them talk it out. So, and that's true, but the idea that you're there shows that you care. The idea that you're listening shows some compassion, and and from things they say, you can ask certain questions that will cause them to think a little bit deeper, because it's easier to ask questions that bring them to the right conclusion than try to tell them what to do. because then you're going to end up being the one that gets blamed for everything if you try to tell them what they need to do. And so there's some of that's going to be involved with this idea, with this lesson today as well. As the title of the lesson was, Can Jesus Restore My Relationships? And a story or two stories that we know very well, but maybe we haven't quite looked at them the way we're going to look at them today. So would somebody start in Mark chapter 5 and read verses 21 through 24?
And I implored him earnestly, saying, My little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your...
Are you verse 21?
Verse 21.
Verse 21. 21 through 24.
I'm in chapter 5.
Chapter 5. You're in the right chapter, you just said the wrong verse.
Okay. When Jesus crossed over again in his boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, and so he stayed by the seashore. One of the synagogue officials, named Jairus, came up, and on seeing him, fell at his feet. And I implored him earnestly, saying, My little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her, so that she will get well and live. And he went off with him, and a large crowd was following him.
Okay, so who is Jairus and what is his request?
He's a synagogue ruler. There's a synagogue, one synagogue ruler.
Synagogue ruler. And his daughter was sick and he wanted her to be healed. All right, so let's talk about synagogue ruler for a minute. And let's try to understand the synagogue ruler. What was a synagogue ruler?
Administrative person.
Okay? He was sort of the chairman of the board that oversaw the activities of the synagogue. All right? Now thinking about that position, which party of the Jews did he most likely belong to? The Pharisees. Now, by this point, we need to understand that the Pharisees are already trying to figure out how to kill him. How to kill Jesus. All right. So Jairus is a Pharisee, most likely. Ruler of the synagogue. An important person in town. Well respected by all the Jews. Important person in town. What else do we know about him? Well, let me ask it this way. If he is the ruler of the synagogue, had he heard Jesus preach?
I was just going to say he had heard him.
Yeah. Because he was the person that determined what went on in the services. So when Jesus was in the synagogue, we know Jesus preached in the synagogue at Capernaum. Because this is the town of Capernaum. So had he heard Jesus? Yes, he'd heard Jesus preach. He knew about Jesus preaching. He had listened to Jesus preach. He's also the ruler of the synagogue. And just while we're in the same synagogue that the centurion built, because there's only one synagogue in Capernaum. It wasn't that large. One synagogue there. This is the one the centurion we studied about last week, the one he built. All right? So think about that. He may have been one of the elders that went to Jesus to convince Jesus to heal the centurion's servant. Very well could have been, since it said that all we know about that story, it said the Jewish elders. Well, he would be the chief of the Jewish elders, so maybe he was one that went to Jesus and asked for that healing. If he wasn't in that group, at least he had to have known about it. All right, that's an important thing. Think about too. All right. So, now, verse 23, the last part of verse 23 says this. Please come and lay your hands on her so that she will get well and live. Now, the word "get well" can be translated. The King James translates it "be healed." The American Standard Version translates it "made whole." So, if she was made whole, wouldn't she live? So why are both those terms used? Why does he ask, make her whole so she can live?
Well, first of all, she's got to be made whole in order to live, because otherwise he had already said that she's in death. And so he would be leaving out something if he just said that it would live. She's got to be healed first.
All right, but wouldn't it be enough to just say healer? Why add and live?
Well, it says that she died. So, we don't know how close she is to death,
Well, she's pretty close, because we know what happens before Jesus even gets there.
Yeah, because she dies.
Uh-huh. So she's right on death's door.
So he knows that even though she dies, Jesus can bring her back. And maybe that's why he's saying what he's saying.
I'm not sure I would go quite that far. And I'll tell you why I don't think we go quite that far. What is his full request? Please come and lay your hands on my daughter. Now, wait a minute. Didn't we just say he's the ruler of the synagogue? That the centurion who told Jesus, don't come to my house, just say the word and she'll be healed. Didn't he know all that?
Possibly.
Yeah, he's bound to have known that. So why does he say, come lay your hands on my daughter?
Because he's desperate.
Good word.
He's desperate.
He's desperate. He's desperate.
Because, when he comes, one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet.
Okay, let's talk about that. Why did he fall at the feet?
He was humbling himself.
All right, he humbled himself. Is that something the synagogue ruler should have done?
Absolutely not. They walked around and they wanted praise from everybody and given the high seats and everything and be high stood up.
Okay. One of the parallel accounts tells us not only did he fall at Jesus' feet, but he worshiped him before he made his request. So two reasons there for falling: worship and the request, but both of those things mean he's humbling himself. Somebody in his position would be looked down on for doing that, and possibly even lose his position for doing that. Because remember, Pharisees don't like Jesus. At least some Pharisees don't like Jesus. Maybe some did. Jairus could be proof of that. Maybe there were some that did like Jesus. Nicodemus would be another one that we know did like Jesus. So we can't quite lump them all in the same category, but we generally do. All right, so here's all these things that's going on, that's happening. Now, how old is his daughter?
12 years old.
12 years old. All right. At the age of 12 and 1 day, a girl became a woman. At the age of 12 and 1 day. So,
Ian Gill's a pretty good birthday gift.
all right, so here she is. You know, has she made it? Has she made it to womanhood? Because it says she's about 12. Is she not quite there? We don't know. But the thing is, you know, Joe average, 12 years old, somewhere about that age. Only daughter, only child. Is it likely he and his wife will have any more? No. It's not likely, because remember, the average age people lived to in Jesus' day,
30.
about 35. Yeah, not past the 30s. All right. So, not likely they're going to have any more. This is the only daughter, only child. She's about to become a woman. Yeah, this is an important time in her life. So, you know, it brings him back to his desperation.
And also, with her being at the age she is, it was important to him to who she would marry, because who she married would influence his life in later years when he got too old to serve.
Okay, yeah. There's a lot of things going on in the background that's not actually in the story that brings him to this desperate situation. Because that was important. That was the Jewish Social Security system. The children took care of the parents. So you got all those kind of things happening. So did Jesus agree to go? Yeah, he went. And as he's going, what's the crowd doing? All right, they're following him. The New American Standard says they pressed against him. The King James says they thronged him. The word that's used there in the Greek language is like being put in a vice and squeezed together.
It reminds me of when I went to Marlboro. My girlfriends told me not to do it, but I did it anyway. And I went down on Bourbon Street in Marlboro, and I got in this crowd, and you could not move.
You had to go with the crowd.
Crowd moved. It was a scary situation.
Yeah. So like going to
Imagine
that's a good example. Or going to a concert. Everybody's trying to get in the door, you know, and they're all pushing and shoving and again, and a lot of those things, you got to go with the crowd. You're not going to go against the crowd. So that's this mob action that's taking place here as Jesus is going. And that brings us to the next part of the story. So would somebody read verses 25 through 34?
And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his clothes, because she thought, if I could just touch his clothes, I would be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her heart that she was free from her suffering. Keep on.
Let's see, through 34.
At once Jesus realized the power had gone out from him. He turned around the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" You see the people crowding around against you, his disciples answered, and yet you ask, "Who touched me?" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free from your sorrow.
Okay. So, the woman in the crowd, she had a problem. What's her problem? Okay. So she's been hemorrhaging for 12 years.
That's ironic. The little girl was 12 years old. This woman's problem started when the little girl was born.
Okay.
Now she's not the mom of the little girl. Anyway, they both 12.
Well, yeah, you picked up on something important, the number 12. And we'll talk about that later. According to the law of Moses, was this woman clean or unclean? How long has she been unclean? 12 years.
She was shunned.
Can you imagine how she smelt? Because, bleeding for 12 years, that stinks. How in the world did she make herself get through the crowd to touch the hem of his garment? Because she had to be weak. She had to be weak. She was a social outcast. She couldn't go home to her family. It was just as bad as if she'd had leprosy. Okay, and so she can't go home to her family. She can't have any relationship with anybody. She can't touch anybody, because if she does touch anybody, what happens to that person? They become unclean. Can you imagine living a life like that?
Isolated.
Totally isolated. No hope of getting well. And broke, because she spent everything she had trying to find a cure. All right? Which she had not found. So what is it she does? What is it she does?
She gets close enough to Jesus to just touch his clothing.
All right, if I could just...
She didn't have to touch him, he didn't have to touch her, just touch his garment and
All right, and specifically she wanted to touch the hem of his garment. The garment we're probably talking about was a prayer shawl. All Jews had one. At the end of the prayer shawl, at the hem, there were tassels. These tassels were tied in a series of knots. The knots sort of served as rosary beads. So as they prayed, they would count up the knots as they were saying their prayers. Okay? That's what she's trying to touch. That's what she's trying to get to. So, she touched him. Did Jesus know it? Okay? How did he know it? How did he know her touch from everybody else's? He felt the power go out. He felt the power go out. Everybody else is bumping up against him. They're not there for healing or anything. It didn't need any power. There's a difference in her touch and the crowds. Now, of course, Peter and James and John and all the other disciples, when Jesus stopped and said, "Who touched me?" What's their response?
Everyone.
everybody's touching you.
Look at this crowd, and you're going to ask that question. I mean, and we would have done the same thing. I mean, let's be honest. We would have done the same thing because we didn't know Jesus felt the power go out. They didn't know that. All right? A lot of things they didn't know about Jesus, even though they followed him all those years. Okay. Now, why did Jesus ask that question of it? Why did Jesus ask, who touched me?
Well, one, for the disciples to start getting an idea what's going on, and then the second, for the woman to present herself, kind of say what she did.
Okay. Everybody needs to know something about him. The reason he could feel that was because he was God. He felt the power going out. But you got to stop and think here about the woman. Why did he call her out in front of everybody? Well, wouldn't it have been kind of embarrassing though? Who touched me? I mean, did he know? When he turned around and looked, did he know?
But he wanted her to.
I'm sure his eyes caught her eyes.
No, he in most of the healings, he says to the person, your faith has healed you.
Okay. And we got to get something straight about her faith. All right. The scripture says she heard about Jesus. Okay. Faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God. But what all had she heard about Jesus is, I guess, the important question.
Well, she must have heard it and believed enough that she felt like she just touching his arm.
Okay.
That she was that comfortable.
All I got to do is touch him. And it happened. But see, there was sort of a superstition about rabbis. That if you could touch the tassel, especially powerful rabbis that people knew could accomplish things, that when they were touching their tassels and praying, that they left behind something like, well, Mark Moore calls it pixie dust on the tassels. All right? And so her thought was the power was in the tassel. Is that where the power was? No, the power was in Jesus. And when she reached out and touched him, of course, he was God and he knew everything. He healed her. Now, some of the commentators that I read and studied through this week say that God's the one that healed her, that Jesus wasn't aware of everything, that God was the one that did. Jesus is still God, even though he's in the flesh. I know he's somewhat limited by being in the flesh, but he was still God. And I think he knew, and I think he did it. But anyway, the point is, he's got to let her know, and the crowd, that this little superstition about touching the tassel was not what healed her. But there's even more to it than that, though. She's been unclean for how long? If he doesn't call her out, how is the Jewish society going to know she's been cured? So it's for her benefit that he calls her out.
Yeah, because from this point, she can go out and be with her family, friends,
Right.
other people,
Yeah.
clean. And so That he wanted them, the crowd to know,
Yeah,
like you said, that.
it's for her benefit.
Yes.
It's for her benefit that he called her out. Okay. So the woman comes and confesses. She kneels down, confesses. Jesus called her daughter. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Right? Your faith has healed you. Why does he call her daughter? In fact, this is the only person that we know of in Jesus' lifetime he called daughter. Why did he call her daughter? Family. She's been alienated from family and all social relationships for 12 years. And now Jesus, by calling her daughter, is welcoming her back into the Jewish community. All right? So, and that's saying to the whole Jewish community, her relationship has been restored. She's part of us, not to be shunned anymore. She's daughter. All right. So let's pick up at 35. Would somebody read 35 through 43?
While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha Cumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age, and they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat.
Okay. So, what's the message that comes regarding Jairus' daughter while Jesus is healing this other woman?
She died.
She died. Can you imagine the feeling that Jairus had to have? Your daughter is dead. Don't bother to teach her anymore. And how cold is that? Your daughter is dead. I remember one night, Carl and I were in the emergency room with somebody, and I can't remember why we were there, but I know we were there. And this family came in, that the babysitter had been watching a child and had set the child in the seat on top of the kitchen table. Well, the baby flipped out and his neck went across the kitchen chair. And they rushed the baby to the emergency room. The parents were there. Doctor comes out, looks at him, said, "Baby's dead, what you want to do?" Turned around, walked off. I thought, how cold and careless. No compassion, no feeling.
Well, that's what Dr. Stewart did to me.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, it was Benjamin. She come in the room and she said, "The baby's dead, what you gonna do?" I told her, I said, "You let me wait till my husband gets back here, we'll discuss it and I'll let you know."
So put yourself in this position, Jairus' position. You know, I'm sure while this interruption was taking place, I'm sure he was kind of impatient. No, come on, Jesus, come on, Jesus. And then that word comes. She's dead, don't bother Jesus anymore.
Well, now, let me put in a little point. That doctor may have been very cold, and I agree with that 100%. But doctors are taught their whole career to heal and get people well. And when they die, it's like they don't know what else to do.
And I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's true. They don't know what to do. Most people don't know what to do. You know, people ask me all the time when somebody close to them has died and they want to go support them. What do I say? Yeah, and my answer is, don't say anything, keep your mouth shut. Just go sit with them, hug them when they need a hug, cry with them, laugh with them. Just be there. And so I think doctors need a little training in some bedside manner about.
And some of them are better than others.
Oh, yeah.
It's the nurses that take over, that nurture the grieving families and nurture the after.
Right.
That was like Dr. Lippard when I lost the first baby. And he patted me on the shoulder because he knew that the baby was dead. And he wanted to know if we wanted to baptize.
No, that was Benjamin. He wanted to know if we wanted to baptize him.
Because I waited till the next day and went back to the hospital. And Dr. Lippard ended up delivering. But he said, do you want me to baptize him? I'm thinking, I know he was trying to comfort us, but that was a lesson he needed to teach Dr. Stewart. But, which we did.
Yeah. So there's that. And then you put yourself in Jairus' place and all the feelings that he's feeling. All right. And Jesus looks at him and says, don't worry. Just believe.
I got this covered.
Yeah, don't worry, just believe. And then, all of a sudden, he looks around at the crowd and he says, everybody goes home, except Peter, James, and John. And so Peter, James, John, Jesus, and Jairus go to Jairus' house. Nobody else. All right? When they get to the house, what do they find?
Crowd weeping, crying.
The high mourners.
All right. Jewish customs, somebody dies, the funeral's going to take place the same day. And how do you know somebody's dead? The professional mourners show up. All right? So here they are. And these were people that were paid to stand there and mourn, weep and wail. And so Jesus says to them, she's not dead. She's just asleep. And what's the crowd's reaction? They laughed. I mean, these are professional mourners. They know when somebody's dead. In what sense was Jesus' statement true? She's not dead, she's just asleep.
Because he knew he was supposed to go back to work.
Yeah, he knew what he was about to do.
Could also be maybe a little bit of an alibi, because when Jesus told Jairus that, don't say what happened, so they can't really explain that she was basically dead.
Okay. All right. I hadn't thought about it from that angle, but that could be a little bit of it too. Because he doesn't want this story to get out.
And this may have been early in his ministry before he wanted more things known about him.
Yeah, I think we're maybe getting close to midway through his ministry by this point, but it's still, he's still got a lot of things to do yet. It's interesting things because he tells them not to tell. But remember, if you go back a chapter, it's in the same chapter, I think. Remember what we picked up? He said after he crossed the sea, he came to Capernaum. He'd been on the other side of the sea. What he had done on the other side of the sea? He'd healed the Gadarene demoniac. What did he tell the Gadarene demoniac? Go tell everybody. Now you get over here and he says, don't tell anybody. What's the difference?
He wasn't a small man.
A group of people.
Two different groups of people. Across the sea you had Gentiles. This side of the sea you deal with Jews. Gentiles needed to know about Jesus. And Jesus only made a few stops on the Gentile side of the sea. So he had to have somebody over there telling. On his side of the sea, the Jewish side, he wants to do the telling of what he wants told. So that they can get the whole story straight. Because that's why I asked, what about this woman? What has she actually heard? There were a lot of superstitions. There were a lot of false, fake healers and sort of things in that time. Jesus didn't want to be put in the category of those things. So he wants his things told the way he wants it told. All right, but he went and he took the little girl by the hand. Who did he allow to go in the room with him? Mother and father. Peter, James, and John. Remember, those three show up at very important events, like the Transfiguration. We find Peter, James, and John. The raising of this little girl, we find Peter, James, and John. In the garden, the ones Jesus took with him to pray, Peter, James, and John. All right. So this tells us this is an important event. Peter, James, and John are there, not the rest of them. And what does he say to the little girl?
Get up.
Talitha Kumi, little girl, arise. Okay? And she does.
She even gets up and walks around.
And what else does she do? Eats. That's important.
That shows them that she's really alive.
She's really alive. She's eating food.
And what?
And well.
You sick?
Because you're sick, you don't want food. Right?
I still do.
All right. So,
When Jesus was doing the cooking the fish, and the disciples came upon him, he says, let's eat. And that was after he was raised from the dead, so that they could know that he was alive.
okay. Yeah. Because, some people say, well, they just hallucinated. But does a hallucination cook your food? And then does it eat your food? No. Doesn't happen. All right. So, the little girl is healed. She's alive. But think about, go back to what we said about why did Jairus ask, make her whole so she can live. She was dead. Did Jesus touch her? Yeah, he took her by the hand. The woman with the issue of blood, did she touch Jesus?
Touch clothing,
Man, she touched the clothing, but that's close enough. That's close enough to say she touched him. She was unclean. The little girl was unclean. Why was the little girl unclean? Because she was dead. You didn't touch dead bodies. I've always wondered, how did they prepare for burial without touching? I don't know, But anyway, both of these women are unclean. All right, the woman touched Jesus' garment. The little girl touched, or Jesus touched her hand. He held her hand. Shouldn't that make Jesus unclean? It doesn't make Jesus unclean. We talked about this a few weeks ago, remember? Jesus' purity always overcomes uncleanness. If we live the Christian life the way we're supposed to live it, it will overcome evil. All right? That's important stuff here that we need to think about. There's so many things packed into this story we could unfold on, but I've already gone way over, so we have to stop. Okay. So, Nathaniel, would you lead us in prayer, please?
Let's pray. Dear God, thank you for the blessings that you've given to us and for this time that we've come together to study from your word and to offer up these prayers to you. We ask that the rest of the service today goes well and that would help us to be better shining lights for your kingdom. For it's in your Son, Jesus Christ, in his name I pray. Amen.
Amen.